All right. Well, I'll get started. Dear God, we thank you for everybody that's on the line today. We thank you for the people that aren't here. Please be with us. Help us to be an example of your love in this world. Please give us opportunities to act um, with courage this week and help us to be able to see how to be respectful of others in their time of need. We're so thankful for the opportunities you give us. We're so thankful for the relationships and the experiences that you've gifted to us. Help us to walk in humility and help us to see aspects of our lives that we're proud about. Amen. All right. Okay, so our talk today, can everybody see the screen just fine, I'm guessing?
Yeah.
All right. Some of us will be pretty familiar with this song. Others may not be. I'm not going to sing it for you today. I had thought about it, but so in 1980, I was not that old. I was 3 years old in 1980, but my grandmother had a jukebox in her basement. And in the jukebox in her basement, she had all the recent singles for country and western music, because she celebrated both types of music, country and western music. And one of the records that I listened to from as early as I could remember, so 3 years old and on, was a single by Mac Davis called "It's Hard to Be Humble." So we're going to talk a little bit about this today, and in the words of the not so immortal Mac Davis, it was, "Oh Lord, it's hard to be humble when you're perfect in every way." Of course, it's because you can't wait to look in a mirror. And the reason you can't wait to look in a mirror is because you get better looking each day. And then, of course, to know me is to love me. But, at the end, he finishes up the song, the verse with chorus with, "But I'm doing the best that I can." So I encourage you guys, if you need a little pick-me-up this week, to follow the link on the PowerPoint presentation to the Muppet Show, and you can watch Mac Davis sing "Oh Lord, It's Hard to Be Humble" to the Muppets. And as some of you might have noticed, I'm quite the Muppets fan. So we're faced with this idea of humility here recently in ways that we haven't seen it in a long time. And I wanted to get at what the idea of humility is. Sometimes we use words, we don't exactly know what they mean or what the real meaning of it is. Humility just comes from a Latin word, and it simply means to be low, to basically rank yourself lower than others, or in a humble origin. So a lot of times people think of humility as being modest or low self-regard. We struggle a lot of times with humility with the idea of self-respect is, well, I need to respect myself. I need to have self-respect. Therefore, I can't have humility. And we struggle a lot of times with these ideas of the world that tell us this is how we should treat ourselves. And then we think of humility as being something other than that. But simply, it's just this idea of being low on the ground is what the term humility, the root of humility came from, being low towards the ground. Rick Warren had tried to quote C.S. Lewis years ago, and he had done a quote that is equally as good, saying humility is not thinking less of yourself, it's thinking of yourself less. So thinking less often of yourself, thinking of others more often. C.S. Lewis was quoted saying, humility is something that when it is lacking in another person, it's easy to notice. I think all of us can look at people that are lacking humility, and it's easy for us to see that person is lacking humility. We can see news bites, we can see people on conferences, and we can realize that there's that person that just talks loud at the Zoom meeting that everybody has to listen to because they're lacking humility. But C.S. Lewis said that humility is something that when it's lacking another person, it's easy to notice. However, we often are unaware of when it's missing in our own lives. I think that's a challenge. That is a challenge for me this week, and I will challenge each of you to think about that. Is, can I notice when humility's lacking in my life this week? Thus, this virtue is clearly a desirable quality, and finding expressions that support it is all that matters. So what C.S. Lewis was saying is that one of our most important things in life is just finding ways to be humble, and not be stuck in a prison of pride. So, wrong screen. So we struggle with humility in a pride-driven world. If we look at the media, everything encourages us to have pride for one reason or another. And when people are proud about certain things, we allow each other to have in-groups and out-groups. And really what your in-group is what you're proud of that makes you the same. So if you have something that joins you together, that's something you can put pride in, and that's what creates our groups. Pride essentially says, I deserve something. Pride says, I've worked hard. Pride says, I've done more than any others. Pride says, I did that once and I can do it again. Pride says, I am in control. Pride says, I can get that done by. And some of these dots are, you look at them and you're like, okay, well, I don't say that. Other ones hit me a lot closer to home. I think of the things of I can get it done by. Well, that seems pretty good. I mean, we want to be responsible for our time, but sometimes our pride gets in the way of us acting responsible. I mean, I think of many times where I've told people, well, I'll get this done by this time, but I've never talked to my wife about it. I've never thought about my kids' needs in that time between there. And whereas the person on the other end of the line is probably going to be okay if I say to them, hey, let me discuss this and get back to you with a time. But a lot of times I'm so proud that I want to get back to a time of I'll get this done by, and give somebody a date. So pride and humility, we're kind of at a point where the difference, the opposite of humility is pride in our lives. And really they go at answering the same questions. Pride is kind of a cover-up of my questions with me. I say, how do I define myself? And then I look at something I've done and I try to make myself defined by that thing that I've done. So I've run the brake line program, so I'm pretty amazing. That's my pride. Or who am I? Or you ask your question of who am I? And instead of trying to figure out who you are in the grand scheme of everything, you look at one little aspect of your life and you say, am I at this point? Well, I'm happen to be the snazziest dresser that's sitting in my library right now. And you define yourself by these little ideas that don't really matter in the grand scheme, but we prop them up to make them really important. And then we also look at pride as, how do other people see me? Well, they see me as the best person that's ever worn a white hat backwards at 6 o'clock in the morning. And we think of these ways of how they cover us up, whereas humility is really getting at the same questions, but we cover them up by others and and kind of our aspect of how we interact with others, and others being God as well as being just other people. So I think of the less than great NFL quarterback Tim Tebow. He had a good year and stuff, but ultimately he was a pretty awful quarterback. But I sure liked the guy and still like the guy. But one of the things that was amazing to me when he was playing for the Denver Broncos years ago is that he would get done with a game, and he may have done pretty good in that game, or maybe he didn't do well in that game, but it was always a focus on others. And he'd always turn that idea of what happened in the game back to others. I think that's part of what humility is when we do something well, do we have a focus that can send it back to others and encourage others? And this isn't like a self-help or just kind of making people feel better about themselves idea. And this isn't lying to somebody when they didn't do something well, but are we looking at ways to encourage and empower others in this situation? Or are we trying to find ways that we just elevate ourselves? Are we putting ourselves down lower than others, or are we putting ourselves up higher than others? So I mentioned this a couple of weeks ago. Our example of following Christ, I think of Matthew 21. This week is the start of Holy Week, and this is the week when in the Bible, Jesus entered into Jerusalem on a donkey, and then by the end of the week, they had him crucified. So people call it a Passion Week. It's basically everybody was excited a week earlier, and then by the end of the week, they decided they were going to kill him. And the reason they were excited is because they wanted something different for him than what he was going to bring to them. And I think of how Christ entered into Jerusalem. He came in on a lowly donkey. Here's a photo of, this is my best photo of somebody that looked Jewish riding a small donkey that I could find online. Most of them had this kind of very Aryan looking man riding a more majestic horse, type of thing. But in the gospel in Matthew 21, it said, find the young colt that's never been ridden yet. And the idea is that this colt was probably smaller than Jesus was. So it's not like he looked pretty majestic. It wasn't like he was in Aladdin riding a massive elephant in through the streets of Alibaba. This was riding this small donkey and being lowly, but yet it was still his entrance into this world. This idea of not putting himself more highly than others. I think of Christ as being the example of humility. I mean, he was in essence God, but yet he came down to earth and hung out with us for a time. It reminds me of when my kids are playing, my kids are pretty good at coming up with their own games a lot of times. And their games, Brad, I would argue that if we sat down and played one of my kids' games, you would say, that's really stupid, Dave. And you would be right. They have these they have these little games that they come up with, and they make their own rules and everything else. And as they do that, sometimes I'll sit down there and I'll play with them, even though the games are silly, because I want to be with them. And that's pretty much how Jesus humbled himself to be with us. He comes down to us. He plays our stupid little games that we've made up, our stupid things that define how we are. We're the best plus player in the entire world. We're the best video game player in the entire world. None of that matters, but yet he'll let us play in those games for a while just to be with us, and he'll humble himself to come down to our level. As I'd said a couple weeks ago, following Christ is a horrible hobby to have. If we're going to be a follower of Christ, it really commits that we follow with every aspect of our life. We can't just kind of be humble. We can't just kind of follow Christ. Paul said in Philippians 2:3, Paul said, do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit, but in humility consider others better than yourself. So make yourself lower than others. Each of you should look not only to your own interests, but also to the interests of others. This doesn't say you don't look to your own interests. It just says you're looking to the interests of others as well. So it's not saying that you're going to walk away and you're not going to eat food because you're going to give it all to everybody else. It just means you're looking to the interests of others. And if you're blessed not to be able to eat food to give it to others, then great. But the verse doesn't say don't eat food yourself or don't take care of your own needs. It says you want to be looking at the interests of others as being as important as yours and more important. In your relationships with others, have the same mindset of Christ, who in the very nature of God did not consider himself equal with God, something to be used as his advantage, but rather he made himself nothing by taking on the very nature of a servant, being made in human likeness and being found in the appearance as a man. He humbled himself by becoming obedient, even obedient to death on a cross. I think in humility, as we're talking about humility, a lot of it is we look at this example of what Christ did when he was here on earth as being how we can act in humility towards others. The death of humility in the Buddhist tradition, they say without a sense of humility and acknowledgement our own fallibilities, or our own ability to fail, or our own abilities to be wrong. Without knowing that, we gradually begin to feel justified in everything we say and everything we think, everything we do, even when it hurts others, because we don't observe our own actions as being something that others can approach us on, or they're not reproachable. So in other words, what that means is that we get to a point where we feel so justified because we think we're so smart that we can't even imagine that we could be wrong. And that's really when humility dies, is when we can't even think that we could be wrong. We just think of, okay, well, this has to be right because this is how it's always been. Arrogance, pride, and ignorance will kill humility in a person. Being humble itself is a spiritual practice, thinking of others more highly than yourself, and thinking of yourself less often. So in growing in humility, here's I don't know if they're 9 or 10 steps, I didn't count them, but here's some ideas that I saw related to growing in humility. James, brother of Jesus, wrote in James 4:6, God resists the proud, but gives grace to the humble. So if we want grace from God, we probably want to grow in humility. Down in the bottom right-hand corner is what a psychiatrist called the pride axis and the humility axis. And the idea is that you have to fall somewhere in between, and having no pride in your life is going to make it very difficult for you. But yet seeking pride is going to make it difficult in your relationship with God. And God's answer, our answer through Christ for this, was simply that we should have pride in nothing but Christ. And Paul had echoed that in saying that we should have pride in nothing but Christ and his death on the cross. So in other words, we can still have pride, but we want to put that pride into what Christ has done in our life, or what has been done for us, opposed to in pride in our own human actions. So in growing humility, we have to admit that we're proud. That's hard to do. I find myself every day struggling with the idea of just admitting that I'm actually proud about something, because I want to justify that I'm not really proud, that I have a reason to think this way. We want to forgive somebody that we have grudges against. We want to be able to meditate or pray and seek the help of others, the help of Christ for this. We want to ask for directions in decisions as we need them. So when we're driving down the road, if you can think of those days that we used to carry maps in our cars, it was always, you'd be so proud you wouldn't want to stop to ask somebody for directions. You'd be like, no, I can get there. I know how to get there. Or I'll just look on the map, but yet you're lost in the middle of nowhere, but yet you're too proud to ask for directions. And then, a couple other notes today is write a note of encouragement to somebody that you may thinks of you as competition. Whether they are competition or not in your mind, hopefully they're not, but sometimes there's people in your life that think they're competition. Write a note of encouragement. Just say, hey, I appreciate what you're doing. Find ways to be honest in appreciating people for where they're at. Give preference time to family. So I know we've all been at the point where we've had family members that we're talking to, but yet we're trying to get work done, and we're kind of only half talking to them because what they're saying seems silly. They're talking about, bodily functions or silly things they've made up that you don't really understand, and you're only half giving them attention. But give preference time to that, and follow somebody in their silliness. I mean, God follows us in our silliness. He still listens to us even when we're bringing up things that don't really mean a whole lot in the grand scheme of things. And the final thing was, do a job that nobody else wants this week. So if there's a job that shows up that that nobody else wants, just step up and say, hey, I'll take that this week. Whatever that is, whether it's at home, personal stuff, or whether it's at work. So love for God and love in others is at the heart of humility. In Mark 12:30-31, Jesus said, love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, and mind, and with all your strength. The second greatest commandment is love your neighbor as yourself. There's no commandments greater than these. And I think that's really what humility means. Hey, Kevin, who are we talking to today?
This is Emery. Emery, can you say hi?
Hi, Emery. Nice to see you. Very good to see you this morning. How old is Emery?
She'll be 3 in the summer.
Oh, hey, it's nice to see you, Emery.
So good morning.
All right. So one of the questions that I brought up to you a couple of weeks ago is when we walk into a room, part of being humble is asking people and listening to people. When we walk into a room, is our first thought is saying, hey, here I am, everyone. Oh, Lord, it's hard to be humble when you're perfect in every way. Or when we walk into a room, do I say, hey, look at you, there you are. What are you up to? How's life treating you? So in closing, I'd ask you this week, do we value humility in our actions this week? Are we looking for people that are humble, or are we really looking for people that are just proud? And we're looking for people that are going to solve something, or do we actually value humility? So this is, if we look at something related to a virus and an outbreak of a virus, when we hear people talking about it, are we valuing the person that says, hey, we're going to fix this and we're going to fix this in 2 days? Or are we valuing the people that say, hey, you know what, we're trying to figure this out? Are we valuing the people that say, hey, we're going to wear a mask even though we don't really know why? Or are we valuing the people that say, hey, I don't need to wear a mask because I don't need to be scared about this thing? So just a question, do I value humility in my life? Do I admit my own pride? One of my pastors years ago, I don't remember who it was anymore. He said, okay, on a scale of 1 to 10, how proud are you? And it's just funny because everybody comes back and says, oh, well, I'm a 5, type of thing. Nobody's ever completely proud or completely unproud. Nobody will say that. But can I notice the pride in my own life in the week? And that's hard for me to do. There's a lot of times I don't want to notice things that are proud in my life. I want to look at things and be like, okay, I'm not being proud now, I'm being humble. But a lot of times Mark Twain said that we're such a proud nation. We're a nation built on pride. Even the humble are proud they're humble. So that's from Samuel Clemens, Mark Twain years ago. I thought that's a neat quote. But the other thing I would say is, can I listen more to others? Can I ask more? Can I listen to the ones that make me be humble? Can I listen to my kids? Even when they have something super silly to say, can I listen to them? When I'm listening to somebody at work that is 20 years behind me or 15 years behind me, and what they're dealing with is something that's so silly, and I know that they're just kind of spending time and spinning their wheels, can I take time to listen to them even though it doesn't make sense? And can I pray and meditate to seek help from others and seek help from God? Ted Turner had a quote years ago. I don't know what it was referenced to. He said, if only I had a little humility, I'd be perfect, which is kind of sometimes in times when I don't surrender to God in prayer, I think to myself, I was like, well, I did that really good, but if I just need to be a little bit more humble and I'll be perfect. And it's like, well, no, we're not going to be perfect. But humility is saying, hey, I'm not going to ever be able to be perfect. And Mother Teresa had a quote that said, if you're humble, nothing will touch you, neither praise nor disgrace, because you know what you are. And I think humility says that I'm just a beggar. I'm a ragamuffin at the feet of an all-knowing God, a creator of the universe. I deserve nothing, but yet I'm given so much. How can praise or disgrace mean anything to me when the creator of the universe has loved me, even when I don't deserve it? So this pandemic is an opportunity I see for us to grow in humility this week. It's going to be a rough week. We're going to see a lot of people that are mourning. And I think it's important for us not to be so proud to think that we know the answers to this situation, but be humble enough just to allow other people to talk, to ask people questions, to be able to communicate with others, to send a note of encouragement, to just spend a little bit more time with our family, to be willing to let our schedules get broken even a little bit more this week. Make it a little bit more difficult to go out. One thing that we're doing is I haven't sewed on a sewing machine since I was in the 6th grade home ec. And Abby was never a sewing type of person. We broke out a sewing machine at our house this week, and we're going to try to sew some masks for the kids and use it as an opportunity to help them learn how to sew something. We probably don't need a mask. Most likely our family's been through this exact same virus, and we're already through it. But there's other people that need us to have a mask. There's other people that need us to not spread things if we can. And I think part of humility is just saying, hey, I could be proud about what it is that I think I define myself as, or I can just be asking others, and I can be respectful to others in this time. So with that, I'll open up for comments or questions if anybody has anything, and then we'll move on to the technical aspects today. So.
Abe, this is George. Good morning.
Good morning, George.
How are you?
Nice to hear you. I'm doing great, man. And yourself?
Here's a question for you, and I'm not trying to get political, but you wonderful statements about humility. Yet, to me, our leader, our president, lacks any of that, and yet our evangelical and Christian community seem to prop him up. And it's a juxtaposition to me that I can't understand, and it doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
And I'm trying to make 2 cents out of it.
Yeah, no, George, I think your observation is very observant. St. Thomas Aquinas, well before there was a religious right, had talked about 7 mortal sins. And at that point, Pope Gregory, who was before the Protestant Reformation, before the Anglican movement, they had come up with 7 mortal sins: greed, lust, sloth, malice, and let's see, debauchery. I forget all of them right now. But nevertheless, there were 7. They were bad. They made movies out of them. In moving forward with that, Thomas Aquinas had moved towards later saying that these 7 mortal sins weren't things that people had to pay to get forgiven by, which was something that the church, the only church that was around at that time, was saying that you needed to pay for those forgiveness from those sins. And during that time, they really talked about pride being the underlying cause of all of these sins. And we're not any farther away from that now than what we were then. The church, it just oozes pride at times, but I'm part of the church. That means that I ooze pride at times. Josh Allen's part of the church. He uses pride at times. These things we just get times where we live as if we're in control. But you're right, George, in saying, we have an administration that says, hey, we're in control of this virus. And then the next day they say, okay, this is really bad. And then we say, we're in control of it again. But it's not time to point fingers or judge politicians. Politicians are just of this world. Even the best politicians are still of this world. It's time for us to come together, share, and help support other people, ask questions. But I put very little hope in the politicians. I am saddened by the fact that the testimony of so many Christians fall so closely to political boundaries when God is so much bigger than any politics. God is above all these things of this world. I can tell you that there's people that love God dearly that are Republican, that are Democrat, that are Libertarian, that are Communist. And the reason I say this is because I know all those people. So God doesn't have a political party. In the midst of this pandemic, it's tough, though, because you see people that are working in pride in so many different directions, and we get comforted by pride at times because we want to know that there's a solution. But when we see that it's pride just for the sake of pride, it really turns us off. And we realize that there's a lot of lies that are there. But I feel your hurt related to kind of how people are interacting, and I feel how it feels like we're being so, it seems like the followers of Christ and this idea of Christianity is being hijacked by political gain so often. And I wish it wasn't the case, but I know that God's in control, and I know that he must have a plan of how he can redeem this and a purpose, but I don't know what that is.
Well said. Hard to reconcile. One of the things that you begin to think about is though our churches have become human institutions, and
They have.
And so we got to get back to our roots.
Yeah, actually, George, I think that that's a neat comment. I see that there's so much opportunity now for us to be the church in our little groups. I saw a funny thing I shared with some people, a Zoom conference of the Last Supper where Jesus was down in the Last Supper and nobody else was there, and everybody else was up in boxes in the Zoom conference because of the epidemic. But I think in some ways we can minimize who we are as a church because of the social pop icons of corporate worship. Instead of just being, hey, we are the church, we're a body of believers. I mean, right now, we are a church. And wherever anybody is at in their journey, that's okay. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if one person's here and one person's there. We're just sharing, and we're allowing people to share with each other. And we're focusing on others. We're focusing on Christ. So anyways, any other thoughts that anybody wants to share before we move on to the technical stuff? All right, I'm going to close in a quick prayer unless somebody else wants to say a quick word, and then we'll move on to Mike. Dear God, thanks for this time together. Please help us to see where pride is blinding us this week. Help us to act in humility. Help us to live in a way that we're not quick to judge others, but we're quick to love others. We're so thankful for the opportunities you gave us. We're so thankful for each relationship that we're given. We're so thankful for the experiences that you're creating, even along this journey, even along this pandemic. Amen. All right, guys. Mike, I'm going to stop sharing my screen now, and you can start sharing your screen.
All right.